Hello and welcome to Mississippi Insight. I'm Byron Brown. Thank you for joining us. This week we are talking about voter turnout. This month's midterm turnout ranks last in the nation. Veteran Capitol correspondent Bobby Harrison considers how gerrymandering factors into low voter numbers. And does our perception of crime match the hard facts? Nationally recognized analyst Jeff Asher takes a look. It's top-notch analysis this Sunday on Mississippi Insight. 31.6%, that's the rough figure on how many of Mississippi's eligible voters took part in this month's midterm elections. It comes from a Washington Post analysis of preliminary voter data from across the country. The national average was 46%. Battleground states such as Georgia and Pennsylvania saw 50 to 60% turnout. We're still passing official numbers, or parsing the official numbers, due to be released on Friday. But everything we've seen so far suggests that the 4 U.S. House races in Mississippi did not motivate a lot of voters. We're now joined by a journalist who's given some thought to that low turnout. Bobby Harrison is the senior Capitol reporter at MississippiToday.org. He covers politics, government, and the Mississippi State Legislature. Bobby, welcome to Mississippi Insight.
Hey, happy to be here.
What is your reaction now to that low voter turnout that we received in the midterm?
Well, let me say first off that I think everybody should vote every time there's an election. I mean, it's our civic responsibility, and it's not only a privilege, it's a right. But having said that, there really wasn't much to bring Mississippi voters to the polls on November 8th. We have 4 House districts that you mentioned, and none of them were competitive. And I'm not saying that under the right circumstances that a Democrat could win a Republican district or vice versa, but the way we have it set up, there's 3 districts that are heavily Republican and 1 district that's heavily Democrat. And there's just not much chance for a candidate for the party to win. And why that is because our state legislature has gerrymandered those districts such that they're going to have those 3 districts. It's going to be always a heavily Republican and that 1 district that's heavily Democrat. And that's kind of the way it's done nationwide, but I think we took it to new heights here in Mississippi as far as the gerrymandering, especially when you consider that most years the Democrats, no matter the quality of the candidate, is going to get at least 40% of the turnout. But but we don't have, in a perfect world, I think we'd have 2 districts maybe that were heavily Republican, and 1 district was heavily Democrat, and 1 district that was competitive. But our legislature has balked at that notion, and so we have what we have with, there's just not much reason for Mississippi voters to go to the polls this November 8th. So you can blame the Mississippians for not voting, but they didn't have the reasons to go to the polls that those folks in Georgia or Arizona, some of the other states did. So that's kind of where we are.
Why do you believe the legislature gerrymandered the way they did, and kind of explain what gerrymandering is all about?
Well, gerrymandering is drawing the districts to the benefit of one party. Democrats do it, Republicans do it. In Mississippi we have a Republican-dominated state legislature, so they draw the districts to benefit the Republicans. And interestingly, the Democratic district of Mississippi is District 2, which is represented by Benny Thompson. And during the legislative process, when they were redrawing they had to redraw these districts just recently because of the most recent U.S. Census. The districts had to be almost equal in population. So after each 10-year census, they redraw the districts. And after that, when that process began, Congressman Thompson actually advocated changing the districts in such a way that his district would not be so heavily Democratic, and Michael Guest's district, the 3rd district, would not be so heavily Republican. Now, they both would have been heavily favored in the districts that Congressman Thompson suggested, but it would have been a little bit more competitive in both the 2nd district, Congressman Thompson's, and the 3rd district, Congressman Guest. But the legislature didn't want to do that. Congressman Guest didn't want to do it, so we ended up with these districts that are very gerrymandered, and that's going to be the way it stays until the next census, which of course will be in 2030.
You can look over this way when you talk to me.
I'm sorry.
No, that's fine, because your camera will be there. Yeah. Keep going. As we talk about the 4 congressional districts, so because it's very gerrymandered the way it is, how is that advantage for any of the parties?
Well, I mean, the Republicans are guaranteed 3 districts, and the Democrats are guaranteed 1 district in Mississippi, is what it boils down to. And
so the enthusiasm for the voters just isn't there because of that?
Yeah, I mean, the closest election in this year in Mississippi was the Congressman Thompson's district, and he won by about 60%. And just as a And the other 3 districts where I think the Republicans won by more than 70% in their districts. An example, New Mexico is a heavily, is a Democratic state. It's turned into a Democratic state, and they have 3 districts. And the Democrats won all 3 of those districts, but in each of those districts, the election was much closer than it was in any of the districts in Mississippi because they're not gerrymandered to the extent that the districts in Mississippi are gerrymandered.
Well, in New York State, they did some gerrymandering that went to the courts, and they had to redraw those lines, and Republicans were able to flip a couple of seats there because of that. What's the lesson there? If you look on the
Well, the lesson, I guess, depends on how you look at it. If you're a Democrat, national Democrat, you're saying, why was it okay for gerrymandering to occur in some of the Republican states like Texas or Florida, but then the New York Democrats try to do the same things, and the courts there said you can't do it, but those courts in other states said you could do it. So I guess the lesson is to get a court that helps you out of here.
Is there any appetite in Mississippi for the legislature because of the low voter turnout to maybe relook at the lines that they've done, or are they going to? You think they'll keep things the way they are?
No, I don't. I mean, I don't think there is. You know, interestingly, in some states they have commissions, supposedly nonpartisan commissions, that actually draw the districts instead of the politicians in the legislature doing it. And in those states, I think Colorado is an example of that. There's less gerrymandering that occurs because those commissions do the drawing of the districts.
Does this midterm tell you what the voter turnout might look like come 2024?
Well, which I guess is a possibility. If history is in the indicator and Donald Trump's on the ballot, it's going to be high turnout in Mississippi. Mississippians seem to like to turn out to vote for Donald Trump.
We have statewide elections come next year.
That's
do you
right.
think there will be good voter turnout come those statewide elections, or do you think we'll have competitive races and primaries then?
Yeah, but interestingly, the state legislative districts, which are drawn by the same legislature that draws the congressional districts, are about as gerrymandered as the congressional districts are. So the turnout won't be because of the legislative races, but because maybe there will be a governor's race, perhaps a competitive governor's race. We don't know yet, but generally the state elections are not quite as, the turnout in the state elections is not normally quite as high as in the presidential years. And of course we have all year state elections. Our state elections are 1 year before the presidential years.
And let's talk a little bit about that. The Speaker of the House, Philip Gunn, announced that this is his last session and he won't be running. What do you expect that he might do come after this last session here? Well,
there was talk for a while that he was going to run for governor. I think that talk has kind of died down. And so I assume unless something happens, he'll go into private practice. But he seemed to indicate that, he was open to public service at some point in the future. There's been talk. He's, Speaker Gunn is still a young man, younger than I am anyway. So there's talk that maybe in 2026 he might run for the U.S. Senate, say if Roger Wicker doesn't run again, or in 2027, or when the next state elections will be after 2023, he may run for governor. But that's down the road. But right now, I think it appears he's going to step down from his speakership and go into private life for a while.
And why do you believe he decided to step down now instead of waiting?
Why he decided to announce now?
To announce now that
well, I mean, there was a lot of speculation. There's been, once it got out that he was thinking about running for governor, his pro tem and sort of his right-hand man, Jason White, a state legislator from West Mississippi, began to raise money and kind of fill in some of the roles that the speaker normally does. So I think it just kind of snowballed and got to the point that people thought that maybe Jason White was going to be the next speaker, and was kind of self-fulfilling a prophecy. In addition, I mean, he's been speaker for, this is his 3rd term, and it's kind of like herding cats sometimes, trying to control the House of Representatives in Mississippi. So I think maybe he just got kind of tired of it.
Yeah. What do we expect? We talk about this in the next legislative session coming up. What do we expect some of the big issues to come up?
Well, Governor Reeves is still talking about eliminating the income tax. I think that'll be at least talked about, discussed. Hopefully they're going to discuss Jackson Water and trying to, help the city of Jackson solve that crisis. And I think those would be the two main issues. There's some people, think that Medicaid should be expanded to cover primarily working poor Mississippians, about 200,000 of them who don't have any health insurance. They work every day, but just can't afford health insurance. There's some talk of doing that, but the Speaker and Governor Reeves are against it. So with those two politicians being against it, it may be hard to do.
And when you talk about the water crisis, the EPA administrator was here this week, and he talked about that they're working on a plan with the city of Jackson, but that needs to get approved and then by the city council and then go to the federal court for approval. Do you think the state will do its role, or where do you think the state's going to stand on all
Well,
that?
you hope so. I mean, you would think. And the key things to people in Jackson are just that they have drinkable, accessible water. But by the same token, you would think that the state would do its role and play a part and not just leave it to the federal government to solve this issue. But that may be what it boils down to.
What are some of the other top priorities that you see coming out of this legislative session?
I mean, there's a lot of money. The state's got a lot of money right now, and because of pandemic money from the federal government, pandemic relief money, and I think inflation has just kind of driven up the cost of everything. So when the costs are driven up, that actually drives up the revenue for the state because the state is so heavily dependent on the sales tax. So as prices rise on groceries and other things, that increases those state revenue. And it also, income, levels have also risen for Mississippians, not as much as it has on a national level, but it's risen. So as a result, we have a lot of money. We have like $2.5 billion in surplus. So just how that money is spent is going to be it's going to be a big issue. Lieutenant Governor Hoseman has talked about perhaps maybe giving a rebate to people, just like a one-time rebate. A lot of states have done that. Mississippi's not one of them thus far, but California's done it, Georgia's done it. States across America have done it, but taken because those states also have surpluses similar to what Mississippi has.
Are we going to be looking at any loopholes on dealing with ballot initiatives?
Well, I hope so. I hope so. That was supposed to be addressed during the 2022 session, but it hit a roadblock, so it wasn't addressed. But because of court rulings, of course, we don't have a process now where we can bypass the legislature and put issues on the ballot by getting signatures. And the legislature said they were going to reinstitute that. They didn't in the 2022 session, and they're still talking of doing it in 2023. There's a lot of issues that Mississippians may want to try to put on the ballot. There's the Medicaid expansion that I mentioned. Some people would like to see abortion put on the ballot to see how Mississippians actually feel about abortion, to see if in other states efforts to curb abortion rights or to have failed, and some believe that might happen in Mississippi too, but we'll never know if the initiative process is not put on the ballot.
All right, a lot there is going on for 2023 there.
Yeah.
All right, Bobby Harrison, MississippiToday.org. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
All right, and we'll be right back. Crime and its prevention are often the topics of community conversation no matter where you are in Mississippi. Violent crime especially was a key issue for many campaigns in the country's midterm congressional elections. But it's not often that we take time to get the long view on crime trends in Mississippi and America. Jeff Asher makes it his business to do just that. He is a data analyst and a well-recognized expert in evaluating criminal justice data. He joins us now by Zoom from New Orleans. And Jeff, welcome to Mississippi Insight.
Thanks for having me.
First off, what are your most reliable data sources when it comes to analyzing crime rates in today's America?
It can be difficult because the FBI releases data, but they release it on a really severe lag. So their crime data in the U.S. or crime in the U.S. report comes out once a year, usually end of September or early October. So that makes it very difficult if you're trying to understand what's happening now, if you have to wait 9 or 10 months to be able to analyze it. So usually our workaround is for understanding trends in murder rates. We take year-to-date data from big cities, usually cities of 250,000 or plus, or cities with smaller populations that have a traditionally large number of murders that produce data. And so the cities themselves usually put it on their websites. We grab it weekly and build a collection. Right now, I think we have 90 or 91 cities of data that we update weekly that putting all of that together provides an understanding of what's happening nationally. And historically, we can show with data that if you've got 50 to 100 cities of data, big cities, you can really guesstimate what's happening nationally and understand the national trend. Sometimes it's off by 1 to 3%, but usually if you've got a 5% increase in murder in your big city sample, you've got a 2 to 4% increase nationally in the big picture. So that's how we approach data. It's not an ideal situation. If you can imagine trying to do this with baseball, trying to collect 32 teams or however many MLB teams there are of data each month and put that together, and you only get 15 of them and you guesstimate who's winning the World Series this year, it wouldn't be great, but it's the best system we have for imperfect data collection.
Yeah. Well, crime is a substantial part of our own local news coverage. People want to know about crime in their communities, and many of us worry that violent crime has gotten worse in recent years. Does the data for Mississippi confirm that? And what are the long-term trends here?
So it's hard to say. Mississippi is, at least until recently, was the only state in the country that didn't have a state program that reported data to the FBI. Each agency would individually in Mississippi report data up to the FBI. And so it makes it very difficult because a lot of agencies, especially in rural Mississippi, weren't reporting data. And so they had these large estimates of what was actually happening in Mississippi without a ton of confidence. We can say with a place like Jackson that obviously Jackson has seen a big increase in murder. It is not the only place in the country. It's certainly not the only place in Mississippi that's seen a large increase, but similar to New Orleans, where I'm from, it's been, I guess, bigger in Jackson and New Orleans than it has the rest of the country. Not a unique trend, but probably a worse trend in these cities.
And when you look at that, what are the long-term trends when you look at those numbers?
Well, so long-term, we know nationally we had murder was up, went up through the 80s. It hit sort of its precipice in the early 1990s and started to decline then. It declined for most of the late 1990s into the early 2000s and was sort of steady until 2015, 2016 when it rose a little bit. And then 2020, it rose considerably and has stayed at that elevated level. Jackson, very similar trends in terms of declining murders and then a big increase over the last couple of years, which has been very difficult to interrupt and very difficult in a lot of cities to start to bring down.
What about property crime? What are we seeing there?
So property crime, the long-term trend has been a decrease. And when we talk about crime, as the FBI defines it, it's usually what we're talking about is property crime. Murder makes up about 0.2% of all crimes that are reported to the FBI, major crimes that are reported to the FBI each year. So most of the time you're talking about property crime, that's about 75 to 80% of all major crime. And the majority of property crimes are theft and theft. So what you're really talking about when you're talking about crime and the crime trend, you're really talking about property crimes. For most of the last 20 years, I think 18 or 19 straight years, we've seen a decrease in property crimes, which has led to sort of this decreasing overall crime. Whereas with murder and violent crime, you've seen much more fluctuation, much less decline over the last 2 decades.
How do crime rates break down along the urban-rural divide or political partisan lines across the country?
Well, so generally in big cities, there's higher murder rates, not everywhere. New York City is one example of a place that traditionally has had a lower murder rate than the rest of the country. But you tend to, in cities, see higher murder rates. What I think is important to remember that what we saw in 2020 is a really widespread increase in murder. Murder was up in cities of 1 million plus, basically the same percentage as cities 10,000 people and fewer. So you saw this same trend happening everywhere. Murder was up in counties that voted for Biden. It was up in counties that voted for Trump. It wasn't something that really had a partisan spin to it. And we tend to understand trends based on looking at big city data, but that's really a bias because that's what we have easiest access to. Really, when we're talking about understanding this problem, what matters much more than the actual numbers is how has the trend changed in various places, and it really has not been a blue thing or a red thing. It really has been an American problem.
Jeff Asher, thank you for your information and your insight.
Thanks for having me.
All right, and we'll be right back. A quick programming note now. Join me Thursday, December 1st for a special edition of Mississippi Insight as we focus on small businesses in the retail economy. Retail is an enormous part of Mississippi's economy, but the sector faces big challenges from inflation to labor shortages and competition from big box and online outlets. How are small local businesses meeting the challenges? We'll talk with some of the stakeholders on a special edition of Mississippi Insight, brought to you by King's Daughters Medical Center. It airs 6:30 Thursday evening, December 1st, only on WJTV. We'll be back next weekend with more of the political and current affairs coverage that you demand. I'm Byron Brown. From all of us here at 12 News, make it a great weekend.